The sinners in Zion are afraid. Fearfulness is surprise to hypocrites. Who among us shall dwell with the devouring fire? Who among us shall dwell with everlasting burnings? Section 1. Showing who are sinners in Zion. There are two kinds of persons among God's professing people. The one, those who are truly godly, spoken of in the verse following the text. He that walks righteously and speaks uprightly, and so on. The other kind consists of sinners in Zion, or hypocrites. It is to be observed that the prophet in this chapter speaks interchangeably first to the one and then to the other of these characters of men, awfully threatening and denouncing the wrath of God against the one, and comforting the other with gracious promises. Thus you may observe in the 5th and 6th verses there are comfortable promises to the godly. Then, in the 8 following verses, awful judgments are threatened against the sinners in Zion. Again, in the 2 next verses are blessed promises to the sincerely godly, and in the former part of verse 17. And then in the latter part of verses 18 and 19 are terrible threatenings to sinners in Zion. Then in the verses that follow are gracious promises to the godly. Our text is part of what is said in this chapter to sinners in Zion. In verse 10 it is said, Now will I rise, saith the Lord. Now will I be exalted. Now will I lift up myself. In other words, now I will arise to execute wrath upon the ungodly. I will not let them alone any longer. They shall see that I am not asleep, and that I am not regardless of mine own honor. Now will I be exalted. Though they have cast contempt upon me, yet I will vindicate the honor of my own majesty. I will exalt myself and show my greatness and my awful majesty in their destruction. Now will I lift up myself. Now I will no longer have mine honor trampled in the dust by them, but my glory shall be manifested. Verse 11, the prophet proceeds, You shall conceive chaff. You shall bring forth stubble, i.e., you shall pursue happiness and ways of wickedness, but you shall not obtain it. You are as ground which brings forth no fruit, as if only chaff were sowed in it. It brings forth nothing but stubble, which is fit for nothing but to be burned. It seems to have been the manner in that land where the corn grew very rank, when they had reaped the wheat and gathered it off from the ground to set fire to the stubble, which is alluded to here, and therefore it is added, Your breath as fire shall devour you, i.e., your own wicked speeches, your wickedness that you commit with your breath or with your tongues shall set fire to the stubble and devour it. Then it follows in verse 12, And the people shall be as the burnings of lime, as they are wont to burn lime in a great and exceeding fierce fire, till stones and bones and other things are burnt to lime. So the wicked shall be burnt in the fire of God's wrath. As thorns cut up, shall they be burnt in the fire. As briars and thorns are the encumbrance and curse of the ground, where they grow, and are wont to be burnt, so shall it be with the wicked that are among God's people, and grow in God's field. Hebrews 6, 7, and 8. For the earth which drinks in the rain that comes oft upon it, and brings forth herbs meet for them by whom it is dressed, receives blessings from God. But that which bears thorns and briars is rejected, and is nigh unto cursing, whose end is to be burned. Then it follows in verse 13, Hear ye that are far off what I have done, and you that are near acknowledge my might. This implies that God will, by the destruction of ungodly men, manifest his glory very publicly, even in the sight of the whole world, both in the sight of those that are near and of those that are far off. acknowledge my might, which implies that God will execute wrath upon ungodly men in such a manner as extraordinarily to show forth his great and mighty power. The destruction and misery of the wicked will be so dreadful that it will be a manifestation of the omnipotent power of God, that he can execute such misery agreeably to Romans 9, verse 22. What if God, willing to show his wrath and to make his power known, endured with much long suffering the vessels of wrath fitted to destruction? Next, follow these words. The sinners in Zion are afraid. Fearfulness is surprise to hypocrites. Who among us shall dwell with the devouring fire? Who among us shall dwell with everlasting burnings? The sense is that the time will come when fearfulness will surprise the sinners in Zion, because they will know that they are about to be cast into a devouring fire, which they must suffer forever and ever, and which none can endure. It may be inquired, who are the sinners in Zion? I answer that they are those who are in a natural condition among the visible people of God. Zion, or the city of David of old, was a type of the church, and the church of God in Scripture is perhaps more frequently called by the name of Zion than by any other name. And commonly by Zion is meant the true church of Christ, or the invisible church of true saints. But sometimes by this name is meant the visible church, consisting of those who are outwardly, by profession and external privileges, the people of God. This is intended by Zion in this text. The greater part of the world are sinners. Christ's flock is, and ever has been, but a little flock. And the sinners of the world are of two sorts: those who are visibly of Satan's kingdom, who are without the pale of the visible church, and those who do not profess a true religion, nor attend the external ordinances of it. Besides these, there are the sinners in Zion. Both are the objects of the displeasure and wrath of God, but his wrath is more especially manifested in Scripture against the latter. Sinners in Zion will have by far the lowest place in hell. They are exalted nearest to heaven in this world, and they will be lowest in hell in another. The same is meant by hypocrites. Sinners in Zion are all hypocrites, for they make a profession of the true religion. They attend God's ordinances and make a show of being the worshippers of God, but all is hypocrisy. Section 2. How fearfulness will hereafter surprise sinners in Zion. They will hereafter be afraid. Now many of them seem to have a little or no fear. They are quiet and secure. Nothing will awaken them. The most awful threatenings and the loudest warnings do not much move them. They are not so much moved with them, but they can eat and drink and sleep and go about their worldly concerns without much disturbance. But the time will come when the hardest and most stupid wretches will be awakened, though now preaching will not awaken them, and the death of others will not make them afraid, though seeing others awakened and converted will not much affect them, though they can stand all that is to be heard and seen at the time of general outpouring of the Spirit of God, without being much moved. Yet the time will come when they will be awakened, and fear will take hold of them. They will be afraid of the wrath of God, however senseless they be now. They will hereafter be sensible of the awful greatness of God, and that it is a fearful thing to fall into his hands. They will be surprised with fear. This seems to imply two things, namely, the greatness of their fear and the suddenness of it. The greatness of their fear. Surprise argues a high degree of fear. Their fears will be to the degree of astonishment. Some of the sinners in Zion are somewhat afraid now. They now and then have some degree of fear. They are not indeed convinced that there is such a place as hell, but they are afraid there is. They are not thoroughly awakened, neither are they quite easy. They have at certain times inward molestations from their consciences, but they have not such degrees of fear as to put them upon any thorough endeavors to escape future wrath. However, hereafter they will have fear enough, as much and a great deal more than they will be able to stand under. Their fear will be to the degree of horror. They will be horribly afraid, and the terrors will take hold on them as waters. Thus we read of their fear coming as a desolation, and of distress and anguish coming upon them. Proverbs 1, verse 27. It is also very emphatically said of the wicked that trouble and anguish shall prevail against him, as a king ready to the battle. Job 15, verse 24. The stoutest heart of them all will then melt with fear. The hearts of those who are of a sturdy spirit, and perhaps scorn to own themselves afraid of any man, and are even ashamed to own themselves afraid of the wrath of God, will then become as weak as water, as weak as the heart of a little child, and the most reserved of them will not be able to hide his fears. Their faces will turn pale. They will appear with amazement in their countenance. Every joint in them will tremble. All their bones will shake, and their knees will smite one against another. Nor will they be able to refrain from crying out with fear, and from rending the air with the most dismal shrieks. They will be suddenly seized with fear. The sinners in Zion often remain secure, till they are surprised as with a cry at midnight. They will be, as it were, awakened out of their secure sleep in a dismal fright. They will see an unexpected calamity coming upon them, far more dreadful than they were aware of, and coming in an unexpected season. With respect to the time when the wicked shall be thus surprised with fear, it is often so on a deathbed. Many things pass in their lifetime which one would think might well strike terror into their souls, as when they see others die who are as young as they, and of like condition and circumstances with themselves, whereby they may see how uncertain their lives are, and how unsafe their souls. It may well surprise many sinners to consider how old they are grown and are yet in a crisis state. Much of their opportunity to get an interest in Christ is irrecoverably gone, and how little remains. Also, how much greater their disadvantages now are than they have been. But these things do not terrify them. As age increases, so does the hardness and stupidity of their hearts grow upon them. But when death comes, then the sinner is often filled with astonishment. It may be, when he is first taken sick, he has great hope that he shall recover, as men are ready to flatter themselves with hopes that things will be as they fain would have them. But when the distemper comes to prevail much upon him, and he sees that he is going into eternity, when he sees that all the medicines of physicians are in vain, that all the cares and endeavors of friends are to no purpose, that nothing seems to help him, that his strength is gone, that his friends weep over him and look upon his case as desperate, when he sees by the countenance behavior of the physician that he looks upon his case as past hope, and perhaps overhears a whispering in the room, wherein his friends signify one to another that they look upon it that he is struck with death, or wherein they tell one another that his extreme parts grow cold, that his countenance and manner of breathing and his pulse show death, and that he begins to be in a cold death sweat. And when perhaps by and by someone thinks himself bound in duty and faithfulness to let him know the worst, and therefore comes and asks him whether or not he is sensible that he is dying, then how doth fearfulness surprise the sinner in Zion? How does his heart melt with fear? This is a thing which he feared ever since he was taken sick, but till now he had hope that he should recover. The physician did not speak, or if he despaired, he spoke of such and such medicines as being very proper, and he hoped that they would be effectual. And when these failed, he changed his medicines and applied something new. Then the sinner hoped that would be effectual. Thus, although he constantly grew worse and worse, still he hoped to recover. At the same time, he cried to God to spare him, and made promises how he would live if God would spare him, and he hoped that God would hear him. He observed also that his friends, and perhaps the minister, seemed to pray earnestly for him, and he could not but hope that those prayers would be answered, and he should be restored. But now how doth his heart sink and die within him? How does he look about with a frighted countenance? How quick is the motion of his eye through inward fear, and how quick and sudden are all his motions? What a frightful hurry doth he seem to be in? How doth everything look to him when he sees pale, grim death staring him in the face, and a vast eternity within a few hours or minutes of him? And maybe he struggles for a little hope. He is loath to believe what is told him. He tells his informers that he hopes they are more affrighted than they need be. He hopes that those symptoms arise from some other cause, and like a poor drowning man, he catches at slender and brittle twigs and clenches his hands about whatever he sees within his reach. But as death creeps more and more on him, he sees his twigs break. All his hopes of life fail, and he sees he must die. Oh, there is nothing but death before him. He has been hoping, but his hopes are all dashed. He sees this world and all that belongs to it are gone. Now come the thoughts of hell into his mind with amazement. Oh, how shall he go out of the world? He knows he hath no interest in Christ. His sins stare him in the face. Oh, the dreadful gulf of eternity. He had been crying to God, perhaps, since he was sick, to save him. He has some hope, if it were his last sickness, that yet God would pity him and give him pardoning grace before he should die. He begged and pleaded, and he hoped that God would have pity on his poor soul. At the same time, he asked others to pray for him, and he had been looking day after day for some light to shine into his soul. But alas, now he is dying, and his friends ask him how death appears to him, whether any light appear, whether God has not given him some token of his favor, and he answers no with a poor, faltering, trembling voice, if able to speak at all. Or if his friends ask a signal of hope, he can give none. Now death comes on him more and more, and he is just on the brink of eternity. Who can express the fear, the misgivings, the hangings back, and the horrible fright and amazement of his soul? Some who in such circumstances have been able to speak have been known to cry out, "Oh, eternity! Eternity!" And some, "Oh, 1,000 worlds for an inch of time. Oh, if they might but live a little while longer." But it must not be. Go they must. They feel the frame of nature dissolving, and perceive the soul as just a-going, for sometimes the exercise of reason seems to hold to the last. What in such a case is felt in the soul, in those last moments, when it is just breaking its bands with the body, about to fetch its leap on the edge of eternity, in the very brink of hell, without any Savior or the least testimony of divine mercy. I say, what is sometimes felt by Christ's souls in those moments, none can tell. nor is it within the compass of our conception. Number 2, the misery of the departed soul of a sinner, besides what it now feels, consists in a great part in amazing fears of what is yet to come. When the union of the soul and body is actually broken, and the body has fetched its last gasp, the soul forsakes its old habitation, and then falls into the hands of devils, who fly upon it and seize it more violently than ever hungry lions flew upon their prey. And with what horror will it fall into those cruel hands? If we imagine to ourselves the dreadful fear with which a lamb or kid falls into the paws of a wolf, which lays hold of it with open mouth. If we imagine to ourselves the feeling of a little child that has been pursued by a lion, when it is taken hold of and sees the terrible creature open his devouring jaws to tear it in pieces, or the feeling of those 42 children who had mocked Elisha when they fell into the paws of the bears that tear them in pieces, I say, if we could have a perfect idea of that terror and astonishment which a little child has in such a case, yet we should have but a faint idea of what is felt in the departing soul of a sinner when it falls into the hands of those cruel devils, those roaring lions which then seize of it, and when the soul is carried to hell and there is tormented, suffers the wrath of the Almighty, and is overwhelmed and crushed with it, it will also be amazed with the apprehensions of what shall yet remain. To think of an eternity of this torment remaining, oh, how will it feel and overbear and sink down the wretched soul? How will the thought of the duration of this torment without end cause the heart to melt like wax? How will the thought of it sink the soul into the bottomless pit of darkness and gloominess? Even those proud and sturdy spirits, the devils, tremble at the thoughts of that greater torment which they are to suffer at the day of judgment. So will the poor damned souls of men. They have already more than they will be able to bear. How then will they tremble at the thought of having their misery so vastly augmented? Persons sometimes in this world are afraid of the day of judgment. If there be an earthquake, or if there be more than common thunder and lightning, or if there be some unusual sight in the heavens, their hearts are ready to tremble for fear that the day of judgment is at hand. Oh, how then did the poor souls in hell fear it, who know so much more about it, who know by what they feel already and know certainly that whenever it comes they shall stand on the left hand of the judge to receive the dreadful sentence, and that then in soul and body they must enter into those everlasting burnings which are prepared for the devil and his angels, and who probably know that their misery is to be 100-fold greater than it is now. Number 3, fearfulness will surprise them at the last judgment, when Christ shall appear in the clouds of heaven, and the last trumpet shall sound. Then will the hearts of wicked men be surprised with fearfulness. The poor damned soul, in expectation of it, trembles every day and every hour from the time of its departure from the body. It knows not, indeed, when it is to be, but it knows it is to be. But when the alarm is given in hell that the day is come, it will be a dreadful alarm indeed. It will, as it were, fill the caverns of hell with shrieks. And when the souls of the damned shall enter into their bodies, it will be with amazing horror of what is coming. And when they shall lift up their heads out of their graves and shall see the judge, it will be a most terrible sight. Gladly would they return into their graves again and hide themselves there if that might be, and gladly would they return into hell, their former state of misery, to hide themselves from this awful sight, if that would excuse them. So the sinners in Zion, who shall then be found alive on the earth, when they shall see this sight, will be surprised with fearfulness. The fear and horror which many poor sinners feel when they are dying is great, and beyond all that of which we can have any idea. But that is nothing to the horror that will seize them when they shall come to see this sight. There will not be a wicked man upon earth who will be able to bear it. Let him be who he will. Let him be rich or poor, old or young, male or female, servant or master, king or subject, learned or unlearned. Let him be ever so proud, ever so courageous, and ever so sturdy. There is not one who will be able at all to support himself when he shall see this sight. It will immediately sink his spirit. It will loose the joints of his loins. It will make his countenance more ghastly than death. The rich captains and valiant generals and princes, who now scorn to show any fear at the face of an enemy, who scorn to tremble at the roaring of cannon, will tremble and shriek when they shall hear the last trumpet and see the majesty of their judge. It will make their teeth to chatter and make them fly to hide themselves in the caves and rocks of the mountains. Cry into the rocks and mountains to fall on them and cover them from the wrath of the judge. Fearfulness will surprise them when they shall be dragged before the judgment seat. The wicked hang back when they are about to meet death, but in no measure as they will hang back when they come to meet their great judge. And when they come to stand before the judge and are put on his left hand, fearfulness and amazement will surprise them. The majesty of the judge will be intolerable to them. His pure and holy eye, which will behold and search them and pierce them through, will be more terrible to their souls 1,000 times than flashes of lightning piercing their hearts. There will they stand in a trembling expectation that by and by they shall hear the words of that dreadful sentence proceed out of the mouth of Christ. Will have a horrible expectation of that sentence. And what shall they do? Whither shall they fly so as to be out of its hearing? They cannot shut their ears so as not to hear it. Fearfulness will surprise them when the sentence shall come to be pronounced. At the close of the judgment, that dreadful doom will be uttered by the judge, and it will be the most terrible voice that ever was heard. The sound of the last trumpet that shall call men to judgment will be a more terrible sound to wicked men than ever they shall have heard till that time. But the sound of the last sentence will be much more terrible than that. There will not be one of all those millions at the left hand, whether high or low, king or subject, who will be able to support himself at all under the sound of that sentence, but they will all sink under it. Lastly, fearfulness will surprise them when they shall come to see the fire kindled upon the world, in which they are to be tormented forever. When the sentence shall have been pronounced, Christ with his blessed saints and glorious angels will leave this lower world and ascend into heaven. Then will the flames begin to kindle, and fire will probably be seen coming down from heaven. And soon will the fire lay hold of that accursed multitude. Then will their hearts be surprised with fearfulness. That fire will appear a dreadful fire indeed. Oh, what chatterings of teeth, what shaking of loins, what distortions of body will there be at that time, when they shall see and begin to feel the fierceness of the flames. What shall they do? Whither shall they go to avoid those flames? Where shall they hide themselves? If they creep into holes or creep into the caves of the earth, yea, if they could creep down to the center of the earth, it will be in vain. For it will set on fire the bottoms of the mountains and burn to the lowest hell. They will see no place to fly to, no place to hide themselves. Then their hearts will be filled with fearfulness and will utterly sink in despair. Thus it shall hereafter be with everyone that shall then be found to be a sinner, and especially with sinners in Zion.